You stand at the edge of the plain, watching thousands of horsemen gather under a sky heavy with dust and destiny. The ground trembles beneath their weight. You know what they represent: an empire that has never known defeat, a force that has erased cities, turned rivers red, and made kings kneel in the dirt. Now they are here for you, but you are not afraid. This is the moment Baibars has been waiting for. This is the moment that will decide whether Islam survives or falls into the abyss of history. As the sun strikes the tips of their spears, you draw your sword. The time for words has passed. The fate of the world rests on the coming charge. Now, let's step back. The year is 1260. The place is a narrow valley in northern Palestine called ʿAyn Jālūt, the spring of Goliath. It's a name that carries weight, because what is about to happen here will echo that ancient story of the underdog facing the giant. On one side, the Mongol Empire, the largest land empire the world has ever seen, stretching from the shores of the Pacific to the gates of Europe. On the other, the Mamluks of Egypt, a kingdom ruled by former slaves, men who were bought and sold like cattle, trained to fight, and then rose to command armies. Leading them is a man with a scar on his face and fire in his chest, a man who was once worth less than a horse, a man named Baibars. But to understand how he got here, how a slave became the savior of a civilization, we need to go back to the steppes of the Black Sea, where the wind is cold and life is cheap. Baibars was born around 1223 in the plains that we now call Ukraine, among the Kipchak Turks, a nomadic people who lived on horseback and knew the language of survival better than any written word. His childhood was stolen from him before it even began, raided, captured, sold. He was just a boy when the slave traders came, when his world ended and a new, brutal one began. Before we dive deeper, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this from? It's incredible to me that a story from the 13th century can find its way into your hands, no matter where you are. History has a way of crossing borders, doesn't it? They took him south, across deserts and mountains, into the markets of the Middle East, where human beings were auctioned like grain or cattle. He had a scar on his face, a mark that made buyers hesitate. Some said it was a bad omen. Others thought it made him look damaged, incomplete. So they sold him cheap. They had no idea what they were letting go. Baibars ended up in Egypt in the hands of the Mamluks, an elite military caste composed entirely of slaves. It sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? Slaves who were also warriors. Slaves who could rise to command armies, govern provinces, even seize thrones. But that was the Mamluk system. Boys were taken young, trained hard, taught to fight with sword and bow, to ride like the wind, to think like generals. They were stripped of their past and rebuilt into something sharper, something deadlier. And Baibars, he thrived. He didn't just survive the training, he dominated it. His strength was undeniable, his intelligence sharper still. He learned not just how to kill, but how to lead, how to inspire, how to make men follow him into the mouth of hell if he asked them to. The training was merciless. Dawn until dusk, the young Mamluks practiced archery until their fingers bled, sparred with swords until their arms could barely lift, rode horses through obstacle courses that left weaker boys broken in the sand. They studied languages: Arabic, Turkish, sometimes Persian. They learned the Quran, military strategy, the arts of siege warfare, and cavalry tactics. The system was designed to forge weapons out of human flesh and it worked. But Baibars was different. While others simply followed orders, he questioned, analyzed, absorbed everything. He didn't just want to be a good soldier. He wanted to be indispensable. And he was watching, always watching. He saw how power worked in the Mamluk court, how loyalty could shift like desert sand, how a well-timed word could be as deadly as a well-placed blade. He learned that survival required more than strength. It required intelligence, cunning, and the ability to read men's hearts. But while Baibars was becoming a soldier, the world around him was burning. The Mongols had arrived. If you've never heard of the Mongol invasions, imagine this: an army that moved faster than news of its coming. An army that didn't just defeat enemies, it erased them. Cities that resisted were leveled, populations slaughtered, libraries burned. Rivers ran black with the ink of destroyed books, red with the blood of scholars. The Mongols, led first by Genghis Khan and then by his heirs, had conquered China, Persia, Russia, and Central Asia. They had destroyed the greatest cities of the Islamic world, Samarkand, Bukhara, and in 1258, Baghdad itself. Baghdad, the jewel of Islam, the city of knowledge and power, was razed to the ground. The Abbasid Caliph, the symbolic leader of the Muslim world, was executed. Some say he was rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses, because Mongol superstition forbade spilling royal blood directly on the ground. The House of Wisdom, one of the greatest libraries in human history, was torn apart. Manuscripts that had taken centuries to compile were thrown into the Tigris. Scholars were killed in the streets. It was a wound that would never fully heal. The Mongol destruction of Baghdad sent shockwaves through the Islamic world. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was a psychological catastrophe. For 500 years, the Abbasid Caliphate had been the symbolic heart of Islam. Now it was gone, and the Mongols showed no signs of stopping. They swept through Syria, taking Aleppo and Damascus. Christian crusader states who had been fighting Muslims for generations suddenly found themselves with a strange new potential ally. Some crusader lords even considered cooperating with the Mongols against their common enemy. And now the Mongols were coming for Egypt. Their commander was a man named Kitbuka, a Nestorian Christian who served the Mongol Khan with absolute loyalty. He had taken Damascus without a fight. He had sent envoys to Cairo with a message that was both a threat and a promise: surrender or be destroyed. From the rising of the sun to its setting, all the lands are ours. Whoever seeks peace with us will be our friend. Whoever resists will be annihilated. The message was clear. The Mongols did not bluff. They did not negotiate. They crushed. That was their language. The Mamluk court in Cairo erupted in debate. Some counseled surrender. Others fled. But there were men who refused to bow, and chief among them was the young Sultan Qutuz and his most capable commander Baibars. Qutuz made a decision that would define his legacy. He executed the Mongol envoys. It was a declaration of war, a line drawn in the sand. There would be no surrender. There would be only battle. But the Mamluks did not panic. They prepared. Baibars had already proven himself in battles against the Crusaders, those European invaders who had carved out kingdoms along the coast of Palestine and Syria. He understood warfare not just as violence, but as psychology, as geography, as timing. And when the Mongol threat loomed, he did not panic. He planned. He studied their movements like a scholar studying ancient texts. He understood their strength, speed, discipline, terror, the psychological weapon of their reputation. But he also understood their weaknesses. The Mongols relied on open ground, on the shock of their cavalry charges, on overwhelming their enemies with speed and numbers. They expected fear. They expected opponents to break before the battle even began. So Baibars decided to give them none of what they expected. He chose terrain that would rob them of their advantages. He chose ʿAyn Jālūt, a valley surrounded by hills and forests, a place where the Mongol horsemen could not maneuver freely, where their numbers would mean less, where an ambush could turn the tide. It was the kind of strategic thinking that separated good commanders from great ones. Baibars understood that you don't fight your enemy's battle, you force them to fight yours. On September 3rd, 1260, the two armies met. The morning air was thick with tension. The Mamluk soldiers knew what they faced. Many had heard the stories from refugees who had fled the Mongol advance tales of entire cities put to the sword, of pyramids made from human skulls, of resistance that ended in annihilation. But they also knew they had nowhere to run. Egypt was the last major Islamic power standing. If they fell here, Islam itself might vanish from history. The Mamluks began with a feigned retreat, a classic tactic, but one that required nerves of steel. A small Mamluk force, commanded by Baibars himself, engaged the Mongol vanguard, and then turned and ran. It looked like panic. It looked like the beginning of a rout. The Mongols, confident as ever, pressed forward, chasing what they thought was a broken enemy. They had seen this pattern before: initial resistance, then collapse, then slaughter. They expected nothing different. They were wrong. Baibars lured them deeper into the valley, made them think victory was close, made them hungry for the kill. And then, when the Mongols were fully committed, when they had pushed deep into the narrow ground, Baibars sprang the trap. From the hills on both sides, Mamluk cavalry poured down like a flood. Thousands of horsemen, hidden in the forests and behind the ridges, emerged all at once. The Mongols, caught in the narrow valley, struggled to respond. Their formations broke. Their advantage and speed vanished. The battle became chaos, swords clashing, arrows filling the air like rain, horses screaming, men dying in the dust and blood. Baibars himself fought at the front, his presence a rallying cry. His men saw him in the thick of the fighting and found courage they didn't know they had. This was not a commander who ordered from behind. This was a warrior who led from the front. He understood that leadership in battle is not about speeches or strategy alone. It's about being willing to die alongside your men. The fighting lasted for hours. The Mongols were not easily broken. They were veterans of 100 campaigns, hardened by decades of conquest. But for the first time, they were not facing a demoralized, fragmented enemy. They were facing an army that believed it was fighting for survival, led by a man who refused to lose. Kitbuka, the Mongol commander, refused to retreat even as his forces crumbled around him. He fought with the courage of a man who knew defeat meant death. But courage was not enough. He was surrounded, pulled from his horse, and brought before the Mamluk commanders. Some sources say he was defiant to the end, cursing his captors, promising that more Mongol armies would come to avenge him. It didn't matter. He was executed on the field. His death broke the Mongol line. For the first time in decades, the Mongol army turned and ran. The world had just witnessed the impossible. The Mongols who had seemed unstoppable had been stopped. News of the victory spread like wildfire across the Islamic world. From North Africa to Persia, Muslims who had been living in terror suddenly had hope. and the man who had delivered that hope was a former slave with a scarred face and a mind like a blade. But victory on the battlefield did not mean peace. In fact, it was only the beginning of a different kind of war, a political one. Sultan Qutuz returned to Cairo as a hero, but tensions between him and Baibars had been simmering for months. Baibars felt he had been denied the recognition he deserved. He had led the crucial ambush at ʿAyn Jālūt, fought at the front, risked everything. And yet Qutuz took the lion's share of the glory. Worse, Qutuz seemed wary of Baibars, sensing a rival who might one day challenge him. And then, on a journey back from campaign, Qutuz was assassinated. The details remain murky, lost in the fog of medieval politics and conflicting chronicles. But most historians believe Baibars orchestrated it. Whether he struck the blow himself or simply allowed it to happen, whether it was a calculated murder or a moment of rage, the result was the same. Qutuz was dead, and within days Baibars was proclaimed Sultan of Egypt and Syria. The Mamluk emirs, the military elite who held real power, chose him. They chose him because they knew he was ruthless, capable, and utterly committed to the survival of their state. Baibars was now the most powerful Muslim ruler in the world, and he would reshape the Middle East. His first priority was consolidating power. The Mamluk system was inherently unstable, a military aristocracy composed of men who had risen from slavery, men who had no loyalty to bloodlines or dynasties, only to strength and success. Baibars understood this. He rewarded his allies generously, giving them land, titles, and wealth. But he also watched them carefully, using a network of spies and informants to detect any hint of betrayal. Those who plotted against him disappeared quietly. Baibars did not tolerate rivals, but he was more than a strong man. He was a visionary. He understood that military power alone would not sustain his rule. He needed legitimacy. So he made a masterstroke of political theater. He revived the Abbasid Caliphate. After the Mongols destroyed Baghdad and killed the last caliph, the symbolic leadership of the Islamic world had vanished. Baibars found a surviving member of the Abbasid family, brought him to Cairo, and installed him as caliph, a figurehead with no real power, but immense symbolic value. It was a brilliant move. Suddenly, Baibars was not just a warlord who had seized power. He was the protector of the faith, the defender of the caliph, the rightful ruler of the Muslim world. He also launched relentless campaigns against the crusaders. One by one, he reclaimed the fortresses they had held for generations. Caesarea fell in 1265. Arsuf followed. Safad, a fortress held by the Knights Templar, fell after a brutal siege. And in 1268, Baibars achieved his greatest triumph against the Crusaders, the capture of Antioch, one of the oldest and most important Christian cities in the Levant. The fall of Antioch shocked Europe. It had been a Crusader stronghold for over a century and a half. Baibars didn't just defeat them. He made sure they could never return. His tactics were often brutal. After capturing fortresses, he sometimes massacred the garrisons, both as revenge and as a warning to others. He understood the power of terror as a weapon, but he was also pragmatic. When it served his purposes, he negotiated, made truces, even traded with his enemies. Baibars was not a fanatic, he was a strategist. He also transformed Egypt internally. He improved roads and established a postal system using carrier pigeons that could carry messages across his empire in days rather than weeks. He built caravanserais, fortified rest stops for merchants, which boosted trade. He reformed the tax system, making it more efficient and less corrupt. He sponsored the construction of mosques, schools, and hospitals. Cairo flourished under his rule, becoming not just a military capital, but a center of culture, learning, and commerce. But Baibars never forgot the Mongol threat. Even after ʿAyn Jālūt, the Mongols remained a powerful force to the east. Baibars fought several more campaigns against them, never allowing them to regain a foothold in Syria. He also engaged in diplomacy, forming alliances with the Mongol Ilkhanate's enemies, including the Golden Horde to the north. He understood that survival required both swords and alliances. Throughout his 17-year reign, Baibars was constantly in motion, fighting, building, plotting, governing. He was a man who could not rest, who seemed driven by an engine that never stopped. Perhaps it was a memory of his childhood of being a slave with no control over his fate that made him so determined to control everything now. When Baibars died in 1277, the circumstances were as dramatic as his life. Some say he drank poisoned milk meant for someone else. Others claim enemies at court deliberately killed him. He died in Damascus, far from Cairo, and his death was kept secret for days while advisors secured a smooth succession. His burial was quiet, but his legacy roared on. The Mamluk Sultanate he strengthened endured for nearly 3 centuries, ruling Egypt and Syria until the Ottoman conquest of 1517. The systems he built, the military traditions he established, the institutions he fortified all outlived him. A fragile state on the brink of collapse became a regional superpower under his rule. Baibars' story teaches us that origin does not define destiny. A man sold for less than a horse could become the defender of millions. Courage, intelligence, and relentless determination can reshape history. He was not born into power, he seized it. He was not given a legacy, he built one, brick by brick, battle by battle, decision by decision. History is often shaped not by the privileged, but by those with everything to prove. Baibars stood at ʿAyn Jālūt, a former slave, against the world's greatest empire. He did not blink. He did not break. He won. The world was never the same.